Richard. You're the young lad here, Richard. You're the young one. We're the old codgers.
That's
He's
an
very
intro.
much.
No, he's a
and we
copper
can't
top.
say
He just
young
keeps
or
going
old.
and going and going.
He's. Have you even hit the magical age of 40 yet, Richard?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
No, you haven't, have you? You get
You're not, are you?
sorry, old man.
mental age. Yes.
4. Yes, 4. That's right. There was a 4 in it there somewhere. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Here we are. We are one. We are Legion, as they say, or whatever they say. Lots to talk about. It's the right time. It is the right time. And I can't, because as you can see, I'm not actually candle powered. I've got a candle here ready just in case the solar light that goes. But yeah, no power here yet again, which is becoming a thing. And as I've just said before we started, I'm actually beginning to get a workflow for this. I shouldn't be needing to get a workflow. Hello, Snapshot, and hello, Mac, for evenings like this. And it's funny, the comments, do you remember last time I was on the phone, the comments didn't start working until we had a comment from a porn job, and then the comments started working, but they're here now from the start. So that's good. Well, Richard, explain yourself, young man. You managed to shut down the skies of nearly to France this last week. Wow. I'm exaggerating, perhaps. But
it's not as good as the latest NOTAM that we found. That was a giant actual mess up, which Manuel on our team caught and fixed very, very quickly. But no, this was unfortunately a small buggette in a brand new API that we released that a few people have been able to access. And we didn't do validation on something we should have done validation on, and that all of our other APIs and apps do. And that meant that in this one specific circumstance, someone doing some testing and accessing the software in this way was able to do something that caught us all by surprise. So we've gone back, got a build patch in for that, and that will be coming out in the next 24, 48 hours just while we test it. So it was a major source of disappointment for us when it was spotted.
Just how big was the well, not no-fly zone, but flight
just
notification
little
zone?
Smidge, just cover a little smidge of the UK.
Just small, was it? Just a little, just someone's street or something like that.
It was, I think it was the size of the country, but who's counting? It's only the UK, right? It's not a very big country anymore. So
and it's winter, so it's less
and it's winter. Yeah. Luckily, as I say, we were one upped, I think, by Nats the following day at 8:39 this morning. We saw an OTAM, which was basically setting beyond visual line of sight all the way down to Burkina Faso from the UK. So if you go all the way south as far as you can, it basically draws a map that bisects about 20 different countries and ends up in Burkina Faso, which is just south of Mali. So we were one upped, put it that way.
Fantastic. So does that sort of what do I want to say? Does that sort of show that the ways of, well, I suppose the errors can be introduced. I'm just thinking aloud in my head. When you're drawing it on a map, you can quickly, physically in a room on a wall, you can quickly work out, no, that's too big. Whereas a digital thing, numbers get times up way too much far too quickly.
Yeah, so we have a number of checks, but you have to believe me, that we normally do all of the time on all of the inputs that on user supplied data. And one of those is just what's called a geographical extent check. So it's when we just run it through some sense checks and say, okay, is someone submitting something very large? And if it's too large or it looks a little bit too obviously fake, i.e. it's a perfect circle and it happens to be the size of the planet, for instance, something like that, the system will immediately just flag it for someone to look at on our system. But if you've got, kind of like you've been doing this a lot and it's a known pattern, and it's something that we've seen and we know that that's what's coming, then we adjust the APIs for that. But in this instance, that one API wasn't doing one of the checks it should have done, which was this geographical extent check. What I will just add on that is that none of those checks are run through the same processing pipeline as all of our authoritative data. So all of our AIXM data, etc., that we're processing, all the aeronautical data that comes from authoritative sources, that is validated at every stage. But this was a new API that we built for effectively some new apps that you may have heard that are coming. And a few of our customers have been given access to those new APIs, and it's one of those, unfortunately, that we didn't have that check on.
So this is technology at its best. Remember that when you get in your automated flying taxi?
Exactly. But then again, this jibe is coming from the man who builds ICBMs for a living. So hopefully you test your software a little bit better than
Absolutely.
we've tested that one API, pre-release
Every
API.
failure is a success when you're making munitions.
That's true. Accuracy is not that important. You just have a bigger warhead, right?
Exactly. And evening to Dan, evening to Peppermint, and Think Flight and RC Test Flight are chilling together. If you don't know those channels, follow those names to the tube of the U, and there's some amazing stuff. And funny enough, I've been thinking about YouTube because I've been thinking about the accuracy of the LiDAR stuff you've been doing with the Equana plans, and just the firefighting thing. I think that might be an interesting fit for a land on water, fill up with water, go off and douse that water onto a fire, which would be very handy here. We're not in fire season yet, but we will be in a couple of months. But luckily, it won't be electrical fires that are causing fires, because there's no electricity in the wires.
It'll be candles, won't it, Gary?
It will be. Well, actually, terrible house fires and stuff from paraffin lamps and things like that. And they're really very, very terrible schools with that. Now,
can I ask Richard a question?
Yeah, all right then.
You have my permission.
Only if I have the right to not answer it, but go on.
Yeah. How's the corridor going? Are BVLOS flights happening in it? Can we have an update?
Yeah, well, you're asking about the Skyway program. So actually just today, we had our first quarterly review meeting with our monitoring officer, and that's all going very well. We're on schedule. What we've not done is start building the towers yet. So we're right on track where we should be. We should be deploying our first towers early in the new year, in what we call the wet season. Although I gather, depending on where our viewers are, that name has a very different meaning. But it's part of our schedule really to be building in the rain, in the cold, dark winter months. So we'll be putting in our first 10 towers in the first quarter of next year.
Are you worried that some eco warrior is going to see these towers and declare them to be a threat to mankind and burn them down?
Well, we were advised by one telecommunications provider to add signage to the towers that tell people that these are not 5G towers. But the good news is,
add signage that says they're gluten-free, organic, and free range.
They're vegan. They're vegan towers. And the good news is actually where we are in the plan at the moment is looking at where we can co-locate some of these towers so they don't all have to be literal new towers in a literal field. And that's what's been taking quite a lot of time actually, because we're one of our partners in consortium as is public knowledge is BT, and they've got an absolutely massive estate. And although you can kind of look at a route and say, okay, well they've got loads of properties along this estate, there's a whole feasibility study that has to go into each one of those to work out, is it feasible to put it here? What are the maximum loadings? And I mean, BT have been great partners in helping to do that, but it does take time, right? Yeah. So we're due to complete that in about 2 weeks, and then we can take our mobile vehicle, which Gary saw in the flesh, that will be going out on the road to do field surveys effectively. And once we got that, then we start building. So yeah, we're right on schedule. But I'm sure we're going to have a few equipment delays because unfortunately the global situation being what it is causing delays with things like batteries, which are massively important for us to have redundant power supplies on board. So what was once an 8-week lead time in some suppliers is now like 88 weeks, and I'm not exaggerating. So, we have lots of contingencies for these types of things. Involving changing the power systems that we use. Rather than 48 volts, we can go to 24 volts, etc. But it's just a pain.
So
I'd have to check, but I'm pretty sure electricity's flowing more slowly these days as well. It's affecting everything.
Yes. Yeah, this really expensive electricity means we don't want to use it as very often.
Look at Gary's. Sometimes it doesn't flow at all.
Yeah.
He's even frozen. That's what happens. Look at him. His electricity has stopped. It has frozen midstream.
Yeah. If anyone has ever wondered, that's what happens if you open a circuit midstream.
Yeah. He looks so serious too.
We'll have to host his show for him.
I was hoping Craig was coming, and I'm just resending him the link. So, Craig, if you're watching it, I'm resending you the link. I'm doing it on the phone here, and I'm very well aware that I may cut this whole thing off at any second.
He should be a ventriloquist. I don't see his lips moving.
Doing a good job. I can hear it's the voice of Gary the God, right? He's back. He's animated.
So is Richard ready to speak to sensor fusion they're using on the towers? What do you mean, Mitchell? Give away all the secrets? Is that what you're asking, Mitchell?
I guess I mean, I don't know if I can ask a question back to Mitchell. I don't want to single out any one person, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you mean? Like, in what level of detail are you asking that question? Help me calibrate a bit, because otherwise, all I'm going to say is yes, we do sensor fusion, but just a little bit more detail, and I'll try and answer it if I can.
So are the cameras on every tower?
Politician one day, isn't he?
No, so
are there what? Sorry, Mark?
Cameras on every tower.
Yes.
Sensor fusion is just 10 years away.
Are there RF sensors on every tower?
There are RF sensors on a number of towers.
There's no radar involved.
Correct.
Yes. You see, that's what we need to know. And you can see anything in the sky, correct? So you see other aircraft, helicopters, planes, everything. And all you do is you send to the drone that's flying, or to the operator of that drone, and you say, there's a plane, it's coming on your course, divert X direction kind of thing, take avoiding action before it even becomes a problem. So, you know, there could be like a 3 or 5 kilometer warning zone.
Tactical conflict.
See it, and you say, turn.
Yeah. So I guess there are a couple of parts to that. So yes, the complement of sensors on each tower is a little bit of a secret mixture, but there's really a benign reason for that. And the benign reason is no one should really be asking us, because they're not exposed to it. No one that's flying on Skyway is going to be able to kind of get a data feed of just that one sensor. The sensors effectively are all contributing to a situation awareness picture, and the cloud platform that sits behind that is then making the navigation decisions that help to keep people safe. And what we want, which I think benefits everyone, is the ability to be able to chop and change those sensors as better ones come out, or we find new ways to deploy them that make more sense, for instance. And we want all of that, kind of what we call the plumbing, we want that to be transparent to anyone that's actually trying to use the corridor to go fly. So it's really important for us that when we do talk about them, we're not giving out things like makes and model numbers, because you know what, we want the ability to change them and make them better. And if everyone gets excited about one particular system or one particular sensor, that's what the discussion becomes about. But it is fair to say that, you know, and obviously our goal is to see quote unquote everything in the sky, but there are limits, right? We don't need to see right to the horizon, for instance. You know, as we've built Skyway, I think we're working to around a horizon of about 10 kilometers from each one of the towers that we build. Those details will probably change. And then what we're doing as part of the Skyway program is, rather than just kind of building the towers and then having everyone fly, you know, build the towers on a Monday and then Tuesday everyone go fly, is we've got a whole test program where we have lots of different partners flying different objects at different distances, some of which are crewed, many of which are uncrewed, so we can test and we can calibrate, and then we can configure the corridor for the region that we're you know, we want those constraints to apply. So I guess the last part, sorry, Mark, just the last part then is, what do we do with all that data? Well, that's where we fuse it together. And I guess Mitchell sounds like the kind of person who probably understands this a lot more than other people. But also it's nice to have this kind of audience, right? Because it's quite technical. Generally speaking, you can have two sensors kind of sensing the same physical object. Let's say one is a radar and one is an RF detection system, one is an optical based system, and then they'll just not agree about precisely where that object is, right? So sometimes they can be out by like 100, 150 meters, which is a lot of space. So fusion is basically the art of working out where you've seen everything, where you're predicting it to go, what you know about the way things move, and then trying to make the best possible decisions about where it's actually likely to be in physical space. So what you do is you typically have lots of sensors trying to see the same thing. And as we'll all know, right, it's not possible to see every type of aircraft on every type of sensor, crewed or uncrewed. So it's a really complicated process, which only gets better over time. And I guess the the last piece on that is that Skyway has supervisors, right? So if we see something, quote unquote, on cameras that our sensors don't, that can be fed back to engineering to look at why that happened, vice versa. And actually, more commonly, what we've seen in testing is the other way around, which is where our sensors have seen something before any human involved has seen it. So we record those almost like scorecards, if you like, and then we can play back and optimize as we go. And it's those things that we then do the projections off of, Mark. So it's once we've got a picture of where we think everything is, we've obviously got flight plans for some stuff. A lot of stuff we won't have flight plans for because it's not cooperative with Skyway. Then we've got to decide where do we think it's going to go. And that's where we do all this probabilistic determination and then issue instructions to try and avoid the worst case of everything happening. So it's a really complex and evolving process, but it's the tactical piece is something we've been doing for a while. These sensors make tactical much, much better.
So my next I've got two questions for you. So I'll go with the first one. Just confirm to everyone that airspace does not change. There's no need for use space. There's no need for what the Furcal's airspace. Airspace does not need to change for anyone. So the regulator could actually not change the airspace with your system.
Well, I mean, I'm very conscious to say how we've designed it. I have no influence at all over what the CAA regulate for, but what we were very clear about from the get-go, and it's still in all the Skyway Consortia documents, even today, is that we don't see any reason that there need be a change in classification of airspace. And obviously what we were worried about was, any national aviation authority wanting to put Skyway inside of a temporary danger area or something, right? Because again, from our perspective, and actually just from any common sense perspective, just saying it's illegal to fly there doesn't remove the risk, because it's probably the people that will fly there when it's illegal that are the risk that you're worried about anyway. So from our perspective, it was really important to make sure there's no need in software, because we're not making any assumptions in the software about who is in the sky and if they're entitled to be there. Our goal has just been try and do what the human would do. If you were literally stood in the field doing your sense and avoid, your see and avoid rather, trying to do that, but on steroids. So I hope that kind of clarifies.
So the final part of this is, because obviously it just means I can go and fly my drone in your under your superhighway, not connected to it. You see me, it can take avoiding action of any aircraft that is in the superhighway. Basically, that's what it'll sort out. Now, here's the critical bit that I think. How do we get to flying your superhighway? So let's say I've got a company. I've got my drone. My drone is, let's say it's a 3-meter Mugen style aircraft, and I want to fly it in your superhighway. How do I do that? Do you have an OSC or PDRA for this? How does a company get access to this superhighway?
I love the questions, and I wish I had answers for you. What I can say is that the process is slow, and the process is a little bit more painful than we would like, but it's one we've been trying to do now for over 4 years, right? All of the words that you've spoken about, for instance, PDRAs, are topics of discussion, and we think it makes, it's one solution that makes sense, right? We just want the quickest solution that reduces the paperwork from this to that for a drone operator, so that they can focus on putting either building their own integration to Skyway or using one of the pre-existing integrations that we're going to invest in. So we are investing in several different GCSs where we will go ahead and we will build the basic Skyway integration so that anyone can connect into it. So that's actually that's an exclusive. We haven't announced that publicly yet.
Well, that's great, because if you've got an OSC that people can integrate into their ops manuals, that is the unlock that's needed, isn't it, really? Because, as you said, the regulators are slow. It doesn't matter, I don't think, which country you go to, they're all fairly slow with this. And it's like, a PRA for the superhighway would be brilliant.
The problem, I agree with you, and we're really pushing as hard as we can. And obviously, the CAA are getting a reasonable amount of funding, actually, from the government, specifically to support Skyway and the other Future Flight 3 bids. So it'd be very disappointing for everyone involved, to put it mildly, if we don't get to whatever that appropriate outcome is. But remember, the first part of the PDRA is predefined and then risk assessment, right? And it's to get to that stage, people have to understand the risk. And to get comfortable with it, they have to understand how to mitigate that risk and whether those mitigations are acceptable. So actually, all the way we built Skyway for that reason is, although we've got a lot of confidence in the technology, everyone else has to get that confidence. We obviously still have a lot of actual extra testing to do. So we have to get out there now, build this stuff, collect that evidence, and then present it in a way that the regulator understands. And that is a two-way journey, right? We're very technical people. The regulators are technical in a different way, and we both speak different languages. So, Skyway is about putting a finite date on it and going, right, okay, that's the end game. That's what we want to get to. This is about reducing paperwork for the CAA and for drone operators and stimulating an economy and getting people flying. So, by then we'd have been doing this for nearly a decade, right? 9.5 years by that. There's some time now for change, right?
Well, there's still, let's be clear, still no one's died from a multi-rotor falling on them in Western Europe, or a fixed wing, doing its thing,
probably
flying. Yeah. Death from a commercial drone's not happened as such yet in Western Europe, to my knowledge, if you like, or America.
It's only a matter of time.
It is, and then we'll be able to go 1 in 10 years. 1 in 10 years, Bruce. Now that is amazing. Remember, CAP 722 first appeared I'm going to say 2002, 2000. It's 20 odd years old now. It says a lot for itself in drone safety. There's a lot of paranoia. This could happen, that could happen. But you don't think about it when you get in your car and drive your car down the road. Because if you did the risk assessment, if you said to the CA, do a risk assessment to drive your car from their house to the Gatwick office, the CA physically wouldn't be able to get into their car because their risk assessments don't allow them to.
Well, I think, remember, risk assessments aren't about eliminating all the risk, right? They're about managing
the hazards and managing it. But
I think the point's well made. Like, I think it's well understood. There are probably safer ways to travel than by car. But actually, whilst I agree with that sentiment that drones, to my knowledge too, haven't done any significant damage yet, I think the numbers are still quite low in comparison to what a technology like Skyway would enable, right? So we're thinking that within Skyway, within the next half a decade, there could be 100 million flights annually. So that's a step change. Right?
How do you think? But why do you think that? That's Richard. That sounds a bit like a number plucked out of the air, pun intended. How would you get to that point? What would be moving that number?
Delivery.
The point is, when you take industry figures, for instance, let's take the transport industry or the freight and logistics industries, who typically, most people don't know this, but the guy or the girl that you see that comes to your door is just the final part of that logistics piece, right? So if you put something into insert large carrier name here into their network, it's going to move by air at some point, almost certainly. And the freight and logistics associations are talking about starting to move up to 5% of those packages annually in the next 3 years to BVLOS drones, right? So that doesn't mean automated, but it means BVLOS drones. There are all sorts of really good reasons that they want to do that, including not having to pay pilots, not having to worry about pilots' unions, being able to fly more often, and being able to turn cockpit space into cargo space. So in other words, the same aircraft but carry more stuff. It's cheaper. So it's good business for them. But the problem is they've still got to have one remote pilot to one drone. So the projections that you can then make is saying, okay, well, how often could you fly? How often would you fly? And how would your routes change, for instance, if you had computers flying drones rather than humans? And instead of flying 4 or 5 hours a day, you flew 8-9 hours a day or 24 hours a day. So when you make those kind of projections across many industries, and it's a little bit trying to project traffic flow on a highway, right? Yes, there will be ebbs and flows, but annually average, if you think about it, that's not a huge and significant number. When you've got one drone delivery company forecasting doing over 1 million flights a year on their own in the next 3 to 5 years, and then you add up all the companies that might access this, and the fact that when you and I think about a flight, even as drone pilots, we're probably still thinking EasyJet flight 123 from Heathrow to Malaga or whatever it is. a flight in the drone context, a drone flight, you might have 10 of them in the space of 10 minutes from the same company, from the same operating pad, because they're doing a quick survey. Maybe they're popping up off their trackside drone in a box between trains, quickly imaging that section of track and then landing. For Skyway, that is a flight. Every time one vehicle takes off, enters the Skyway, and then exits the Skyway, that's one flight. So it's like almost like a transactional entity rather than something that spans hours, right? So you add all of that up, those numbers aren't really that insane.
Right.
Well, DJI reported, 82 million flights in a year? Was it 82 million?
Yeah, and you remember, right, as we all know, when DJI is saying that kind of number, that's one person flying one drone, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, from
In the vast majority of cases.
That was worldwide, though, wasn't it? 82 million.
That's worldwide. So again, if you flip that and you say, okay, well, you get someone like the ambulance service that's considering being able to send defibrillators ahead of paramedics during busy times, right? Average time to brain death, I'm sure someone in YouTube will correct me, but I think I was told it's like 6.5 minutes.
70 years.
And still going strong, eh, Bruce? But if you could get there quicker than the ambulance, you could save a life. So if that became a tool, you could have 200 or 300 flights an hour going across a city like London, and it will be saving lives. So that's one of the reasons that we get out of bed, right? Because it can.
Yeah, but there are defibs everywhere now. You can't swing a cat without hitting a defib in the UK. There's one.
That explains all the blood on the defibs.
But to a medical professional's point, who I won't name, if you're going to have a heart attack in the UK, try and do it in a town centre in a busy office block. I live 6 miles outside the town centre. My nearest defibrillator, and yes, I have checked, is a 7-minute drive. So
did McDonald's not have them over there
at that point?
Don't your Maccas have them?
Yeah, I mean, I could try and stumble into the AC sockets on my wall here. But the point being, there are a lot of use cases, and I don't think those numbers are particularly conservative.
Assault a policeman who just taser you, same thing.
So here's my next question. So here's my next. Sorry, Gary. Can I have another question?
That's all right. That's all
right. So here's my next questions for you, then, Richard. So, who in your consortium has sorted out your A and B points? Because this is quite clearly A to B, as I see it. Because this is not two people's houses. Because that's not really possible.
You're wrong, Mark. I've got good news for you. The good news is you're wrong.
That's fine, because I live where I live. You couldn't deliver drone deliveries wouldn't work here really well at all. I think point to point makes more sense. Yeah. If you've got a warehouse and you're doing it to a shopping mall, Amazon collection point, for example, to me that makes sense. That journey works. Delivering
depot to depot is what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, depots. But if someone's delivering a coffee or a pizza, it's very hard to do, because as I discovered today, and I go around doing house checks and all kinds of stuff now because of certain reasons, I have to say GPS and postcodes don't work. They're completely twaddle and can be up to a mile out. So you can't rely, it's very hard to know exactly what address is where. Especially street words.
What 3 words?
Oh, well, what 3 words would work to a degree if people have that kind of thing. But are you telling it where you're landing or where you're stood? If you do it in your house and you literally do it and go, what 3 words? And I'm sat in your living room. What's the point? If you walk into your garden, is your garden suitable? Has it got trees in it?
I guess there are two. Let me break your question down, because you are fantastic at circular breathing. And you have your one question becomes 10, and I end up forgetting what I've got to answer. So hold me to account if I forget to answer. But I heard a few points there. One was the spectacular, caught on camera, forever recorded, indelible memory that you were wrong. I'm afraid, Mark. The corridor isn't point to point.
I'm wrong. That's fine. If I'm wrong,
but to be fair, let me chamfer those edges a little bit, because I'm only jesting. I imagine a lot of initial use cases will be sort of point to point. But Skyway itself is designed to allow entry to any point along the route, so you can exit and egress almost like a motorway with on-ramps, infinite on-ramps and infinite off-ramps. And also it supports, I guess you would call them area-based operations. So for instance, we're going to be deploying a number of towers over the entire area of West Berkshire so that our local police service is able to fly local operations in the vicinity. So they're not going to be delivering anything, right? They're going to be doing search and rescue type operations, looking for vulnerable missing people, etc., over a big area. So what matters is what is the flight plan that you submit to Skyway. And that matters because we might have physical infrastructure along the route that you want to use. So, we're going to be partnering with vertiport companies, etc., logistics companies who want to have you come and land and take off and base an operation from their facilities. And then the last part of that was really around, who's going to be using it. I mean, I'm old and skeptical now, although apparently not as old as people thought. I look a lot older than I feel.
I used to be skeptical, and I'm not so sure now.
Bruce is the most skeptical 21-year-old I've ever met. But joking aside, I think that one of the things we always get asked, right, is when are Amazon going to deliver to my house? And we're like, hopefully not for a very, 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 very long time. Because, whilst it's really novel to have a business plan that says we're going to deliver coffees via drone, I'm sure one day that will become pretty mainstream. But for now, I would have said that the novelty of having a hot beverage delivered, where the delivery is probably the cost of the hot beverage, is going to wear off quite quickly, right? No one's going to pay £5 for a coffee and then £5 for a delivery or more. So Skyway flips that and just says, well, we're not interested in this kind of operation that takes place to your house. Someone could set up a company and do that, and Skyway would support that where the Skyway corridor is. But it's their problem to do the terminal phase of the flight, right? So if they want to drop a package on your house, they got to figure out how to do that. We're going to get them to that vicinity safely, and then down to them to figure that last part out. But until it's cheaper than a teenager on a bike, right? Deliveroo, who's going to bother? And actually, I think for that reason, when we did the business planning for Skyway, when we did the consortium planning, we said this is all about high value, low volume. Right? In the first couple of years, this is stuff that is, say, maybe life critical. It's going to be patient healthcares are going to be outcomes are going to be affected if it's not delivered. We got a great company, which I'm sure you guys heard of, called Skyfarer, doing medical sample delivery up in Birmingham, Coventry, and Rugby. Sorry, and they're doing that and they're getting paid for that because a number of medical samples just go bad in transit on the road today, every day. And the NHS already is not very good at saving money, but it's paying a lot more money just to put a medical sample in a taxi than the same taxi if you and I got in it. That is a crime, in my view, small c, not let's go to court and lynch people over it. But this can be fixed with drone technology, right? And Skyway can fix this. Skyway can fix this. So to make that work, you need to get the towers out there. We need to get the CAA to figure out if it's a PDRA or something else. And they've got effectively 18 more months to do it. And once we can do that, we can change patient outcomes, we can reduce costs for the NHS, we can improve lives for everyone. And then maybe one day we can figure out how to get DVDs to your house if anyone still wants DVDs to their house.
You mean VHS tapes?
I remember maybe 5 years ago, I did an interview for a local radio station. And I think the journalist had done a little bit of Googling and had worked out, these drone things, it could be amazing, but I'm pretty sure that they could kill loads of people. So he asked me what I think was a question which he thought was a really appropriate question to be asking, which was, what happens if someone orders an iron, the thing you iron shirt with, orders that off of Amazon, and then it crashes into a mother carrying a baby? We're like, okay, I don't think you understand.
Well, they wouldn't have any wrinkles, would they?
Amazon are going to put in a drone, but it's probably not going to be an iron, and it's probably not going to be flying and chasing this mum down the street. So I think we got a long way to go, but right now this is mainly services rather than goods, except for when you're going point to point between hospital and pathology lab or something, which I just think is the right use case for this kind of stuff.
They're pretty edge cases, aren't they? There's not a lot of, that's, in terms of total deliveries, that's a very, very small thing. And people who are promoting drone delivery always use edge cases, medical supplies or this or that or something that needs to be super urgent. But the way it's being pitched to the public is Google will deliver your coffee for free because they're not charging, but they couldn't charge because nobody would pay for it.
There is that.
Even Jason and Peppermint, hello there. I'm sorry, I'm And hello to Mick as well. Very nice to see you there. And anyone else I've forgotten. Yeah, there's yeah. Maybe we'll see. It'll be interesting with your numbers. I wonder how many companies are building the platforms that will be able to service those sort of numbers, though, because that's going to be the next thing. Now, I was going to ask, are you grabbing yet via ADSB and other stuff? Are you grabbing pattern of life movement of aircraft within the UK already and giving yourself, Charlie goes in golf whiskey every Thursday between somewhere and somewhere else at 2,000 feet generally? I mean, there must be a lot of pattern of life because there's such a small number of general aviation aircraft. You would surely get to, like Pokemon, got to get them all.
So every minute of every day since around February 2016, we've been recording and modeling as much commercial aviation data as we can find. So that's not just the UK. I want to be really clear. We've got a very good digitized world model of where we typically see quote unquote conspicuous aircraft. And that's given us a really nice inclination, or a data set rather, to use when we're trying to lay down the route. But what we found is some of the analysis we've done on that data has yielded, well, GDPR if it's relating to a person, but unless we've got we've tracked it back to Bruce's plane flying around. But what that allows us to do is to look at the tail number of an aircraft or a track number or something like that, and then do heat maps basically. And what we found is some really interesting things. Like, people typically assume that GA pilots are, this is not my assumption, by the way, I want to be clear, I'm just parroting back and paraphrasing what I generally hear. GA pilots are a law unto themselves and they like to go anywhere and do all sorts of crazy things. But the reality is they can, and they sometimes occasionally do, but they all as a group tend to fly in similar places, right? So you get these hot spots that
just
are
like
really
auditors.
popular. Exactly. Just like what? Sorry, Bruce. I just realized I said it exactly and didn't hear what you said.
It's just like auditors. They can fly anywhere they like, but they tend to congregate around police stations.
Yes. But you find these really common patterns. But again, tactical deconfliction isn't the art of just trying to deal with what you're predicting. It's the art of dealing with what's actually happening. And we use the models to help us make better proactive decisions. For instance, we're able to use that modeling data to work out if it's typically a good time or a bad time for you to fly that particular track on that particular day. But that's not the same as saying you can't go fly there now. You could probably go fly and tactical would keep you safe as you did it. But it's all about using that data in the best way. It also helps from an insurance perspective, all sorts of things that we can do with that data.
Now, Mark's had his share of questions. My turn now. This is great. This technology is fantastic. It has a different sort of spin on managing that airspace. So my question is, and you may not want to answer it because it could be the secret sauce, how are you going to make money out of this?
Out of the data that we've got around,
out of the service you're providing. I mean, who pays? Who's actually emptying their wallets into your bank account in order to use the services that you are offering?
Yeah, no, that is literally the $1 million question, right? Well, the good news is that it's not by asking people to pay for things that they're not currently paying for, right? So you might have seen some large companies in this space that have existed and now don't, that propose things like taxes and all that kind of stuff. And we're absolutely not supporters of that kind of thing. But there is, a very long established, it's enshrined in international aviation law, in the ICAO convention, the ability for anyone who is extracting commercial value from a service in the airspace to have a proportion of that value paid to the person providing that service, or the company providing that service, aka every time you fly on your EasyJet flight, you're paying an ANSP, right? And a portion of your ticket is paying the ANSP to give you that guidance service. We envisage a similar billing model, right? Where if you're, I don't know, made up numbers, if you're getting 10 quid for a flight from a customer, maybe we'll take 1%, 2% of that to give you that navigation service. And then depending on what kind of services you want, you might not want them all. You might not want us to take you to a vertiport. You might just want this tiny little bit of the flight. The services are just consumption-based effectively. And because they're automated, they don't come with the type of price tags that ANSPs come with. But one of the things we are super, super clear about, and we've spent such a long time, particularly in the Skyway Consortium, as a kind of crescendo point, is getting to understand our customers' business models. And the reason we're doing that is we're not flying anything, right? It's up to our business partners, our business customers to go out and work out what is going to be tolerable to their businesses. So where that comes really obviously is if we would love to be able to say, right, imagine it's £1 million per flight, right? There's going to be 100 million flights and we're going to have hundreds of billions flying through. If you're only getting paid £10 for a flight and our fee is £100, there's no business there, right? So that's one of the reasons when we built Skyway and we built those Arrow towers, we built them so that they weren't dependent on things like £1.5 million radars, right? Because the cost of that has to be recoupable. So the cost of our towers are very, very low so that we can pay for them mostly out of investment initially and then start to pay back that cost. Pardon?
Poundland towers.
Poundland towers. I would definitely say more like what's that slightly more upmarket one? But yes, not Rolls Royce.
So the thing is that under your corridor at the moment, I mean, Mark could go and fly a drone there. It's not going to cost him anything, right? You're not going to charge him anything, are you?
But there is one important distinction I just want to add. Whilst that is true, Mark isn't going to get any service from Skyway unless he's participating in the Skyway service.
Well, he's getting a deconfliction service. He's getting deconfliction because you're going to keep other traffic out of his way, aren't you?
Going to keep traffic out of his way, yeah, but he's not going to get the benefit of that in reverse. So he's not going to know where all of our future users are going to go.
Yeah, but he doesn't care. As long as nobody crashes into his drone, he's happy. And that's what I'm wondering from a business model perspective. You look at these traditional UTMs, they're going to charge everybody. You know, they want to have this network remote ID in the US, so you got to pay them before you can arm your drone and take off, even if you're a hobbyist. That means there's a lot more money going to flow in a system like that. How do you convince the decision makers that your cheaper, more efficient system is better when you've got other providers and those sort of standing in the wings like Google who are going to come along and say, use our system, it'll cost a lot more, it'll invigorate the economy, you know, there'll be more money flowing and we'll put more money into your bank account as a politician? I
mean, I guess there are a couple of answers off the cuff. I mean, the first is, while everyone is just arguing and talking about it, which is what most of these people are doing in the main, we're just going to crack on and do it. And then we're going to let the market decide what it's going to tolerate and what it's not. And then the second thing is, I still maintain there is absolutely no way, no eventuality that I think as a business model, anyone should be selling remote ID or something like that, right? To a UTM, remote ID is a number that we can trust. That's the end of it. Do you know what? If you use our UTM, you get one for free, right? In fact, the pilot gets one and the drone gets one. And every time you land, you get a new set. And that's because we care about something that a lot of people don't: privacy. You know, we have no intent, for instance, to broadcast the location of a pilot when you're flying a drone. And actually, if you go slightly further forward in the next 2 years on Skyway, you've got computers flying drones. Which coordinates are we supposed to broadcast under remote ID to represent the location of the pilot? What is the location of the pilot if the pilot isn't a human? So, you know, there are all sorts of problems with this, but the ultimate factor is that's going to be something external to Altitude Angel, right? I mean, if we are allowed to issue numbers, we will. I mean, we have internal numbers, so anyone that's filed a flight report using Altitude Angel will know they get a unique flight reference number. Probably what you're less exposed to today is your pilot number, because we have no reason to give it to you and there's nothing you can do with it, but we have to uniquely identify you. But yeah, as you start flying, you know, we do all sorts of privacy intensive things to protect and shield. But I just die inside a little bit every time I see a business plan or a business proposition that someone is going to sell you remote ID, right? It's just a utility. That's all it is. It's just a number we have to agree on. And more importantly, we have to be able to trust the source of that number, unlike, say, ADSB.
So I've got another question. Sorry, Bruce.
Evening, Sean.
What hardware do I need in my drone to fly in the corridor? What am I best off with? For example, am I better off with a cube, and then it talks to something that's like a Pi in there to connect to your system?
You're right on the money as always. You're like the money guy tonight. But you're a little bit early for me to give you the best answers I can, because as a company, we're still trying to work out how and with what or in what GCSs do we ultimately decide that we're going to go and build an integration versus try and help other people to build integrations against that. So a good example would be today we work really closely just historically with Mission Planner and RG Pilot, I think. And we've got our plugin in Mission Planner. You know, we built that Michael O'Bourne helped along the way, and we've had a lot of support doing that. But there's obviously a lot more we need to do to make that work on Skyway. And then, whilst Mission Planner is great, it's not the only GCS. I think we got a lot of people calling out for things on Tyrion as a GCS. We're trying to work out right now, with limited money, what is it we decide to do that helps the most number of people get access to this technology? And I know that Steve on my team and a few of the other guys are looking to do another kind of drone pilot consultation to figure out what's really useful, what would be really popular. So if you've got ideas, I think we'd love some help to work out where we should be doing that.
Mission Planner.
So what we could be saying there is then that any Mavlink enabled.
Well, the good thing, Gary, about Skyway is that Skyway is drone agnostic, genuinely, right? So Skyway isn't transmitting instructions that are, say, Mavlink packets, right? Skyway is going to transmit any number, let's say less than 10 at the moment, any number of what we call instructions. And those instructions are agnostic instructions, a little bit like a co-pilot might nudge a pilot, right? And say, right, hey, we need to land, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. So our system is going to nudge you with an instruction, and that's going to be passing that to the GCS integration. And then it's the job of the GCS integration to turn it into something that the vehicle understands, right? But one of the things that Skyway does, and the underlying Arrow technology does, is it is quite smart. So it's not going to say to the fixed wing drone, stop or land, right? It's going to give it a different set of instructions that are commensurate with its airframe and its capabilities. So it's important to remember that Skyway isn't kind of like taking over the drone. The drone is flying itself, and the pilot of that drone is still in the loop. But what Skyway is doing is then adding that macro scale navigation piece to nudge the autopilot occasionally and say, hey, dude, in 1 minute to your north, you're going to have an incursion. We recommend you do this tiny little adjustment now. Slow down, change your course, change your bearing by 2 degrees, and you'll pass. So it's that kind of thing that Skyway's doing.
Where's the simulator so we can go and practice flying in the Skyway?
Stop asking questions. We might be doing a fun thing at Airspace World in March, which is a big airspace show that takes place this year in Switzerland for the first time. And it's really tough for people to look at an algorithm and get friendly with it, right? And by that, what I mean is, unless you are a hardcore physicist and you're a statistician, it's really hard to look at it and understand it. So what we're also investing in right now is the ability for people to drop into a virtual world running this genuine sort of Arrow technology, where we can bring into that virtual world actual traffic, or we can bring in simulated traffic. And then you can also, through software in the loop, drop in your airframe of choice. So we're working hard on that. But obviously that's quite difficult. We're using flight sims in the way that they're not necessarily intended, in the sense that spawning AI vehicles that you kind of don't let the game control, but you want to control, is a little bit of a different use case. But we've got some fun stuff coming that hopefully we can then roll out a little bit more so people can test.
It would be fun trying to aggress other tracks and things like that. You could have a great deal of fun with that, and just trying to do some plodding routes. Just have loads of people plodding back and forth from somewhere to somewhere, and just and see if it works with other stuff there. Cliff Fields, he's got quite a good one here. Look,
I read it. I was just about to call it out, actually, because Cliff, I have no idea what you're on about, mate. I don't buy it. Forgive me for being pessimistic, but I've seen this. There is a large difference, isn't there, between functionally describing the technology that is talking to an aircraft, and I assume what you're getting to is the liability element that goes with that, about who is taking liability should an instruction that is given being invalid. That's a very different question. But you haven't decided to ask one particular question there. You've kind of held two together, and it's pressed the wrong button, I'm afraid, mate. So why don't you come back into the chat and actually clarify what you mean? Because that exact process is how commercial aircraft are operated today, with a pilot in the loop. This is the exact process that over the last nearly half a decade, we have been advised by extremely senior people, including advisors in the CAA, to start rolling out this technology. So if you've got a different take on it, you're very welcome to do that, but you can't drop it into a YouTube video comment. You've
No.
actually
And if
got
it works at Peru, it'll work
something a bit more
everywhere.
substantial.
Yeah,
it's the same arena,
I think his Cliff's comment might be coming more from the point of view of we're not interfering from a hobby point of view as well and things like that. I don't think he's necessarily making it from a commercial question, as Cliff is one of the viewers, people that's my is on my side of things as well, but on my channel. But yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. And I wonder if there's what's the alternative if Project Skyway doesn't work, which you know obviously I fly my flag that I really want it to work and I think it's a great system, particularly for the UK, but what you know what's the alternative, and that's really what I have to put to people, and I don't necessarily even need the answer to that, because the alternative is, you know, Google and the likes coming in, and we suddenly start having very different drones that we're flying, very different aircraft, which are forcibly controlled and that type of thing. So it becomes a much bleaker outlook. Yeah, follow the money.
Sean, you ask a really relevant question, and I think the alternative isn't probably Google and Wing delivering and owning the sky, right? I mean, in virtually every regulatory circle that I've sat in, the idea, I don't know if you guys ever remember this, but there was a time when Amazon, I think, proposed a small horizontal band of airspace, which was theirs. I think the reality is that model may fly, quote unquote, in the US in certain states, because that kind of thing is possible. But in Europe and the rest of the world, I just don't think that model is going to take place. So I think my view is that there isn't an alternative, right? The alternative is exactly what we have now, and just more of it for longer. And I think because of that, something like Skyway, if it's not Skyway, something like Skyway has to work. Otherwise, there is no genuine competition, right? There is no. One of the things we're really keen on is that, the one-man startup band can have exactly the same quality of service, exactly the same benefit of Skyway and the millions of investment as, say, Boeing or Wing, right? They are all leveled to the same playing field.
Excellent.
And I think that's got to happen. And that for me is what we're really pushing for. So yeah, I mean, the alternative is just delay. I think it's just delay.
Yeah, and I think any system which is going to keep the airspace open at the very lowest level. So with Project Skyway running correctly and past its trial basis, the thought process that we can have those essential NHS flights happening and defibrillators, and actually I can also go out in clear airspace and fly my Mini 3 without having to jump through any hoops or paying any extra money, etc. I think then it becomes starts to become a bit of a no-brainer.
I would pay to see Sean jump through a hoop. There's a revenue stream there, Sean.
I will send you the link to my OnlyFans page.
Oh dear!
That's a new way of monetizing the airspace.
But I was stood next to your famous ex-Navy air trafficker Phil Binks. Love me for saying that. At Farnborough when Amazon made that. And he said, he can't remember it, but I remember it. He said, he was quite angry with that lady from Amazon. And if you were at Farnborough that year when it happened, she marched up. She said, right, this is what we're going to do. Everyone said, pardon, basically. And then she wouldn't take any questions and she marched off again. And then the press reported it as, Amazon's going to do this. And everyone was like, what? It was nuts. But yes, that's a very long time ago now. It's probably 12, 14 years ago that we did that. There
are so many reasons, I think, why a member state or a country isn't going to allow one commercial entity to monopolize its airspace, right? It's just so many reasons. And, a very important one is that the military are allowed to use the airspace, and it's a sovereign asset, right? So if you're going to be a UTM, you have to be aware of where that military traffic is. And you've got to then ask yourself, is the government going to want to give that one company or even N companies a view on that military air traffic? And the answer to that is probably not. And that's why, certainly across Europe, this whole kind of CIS architecture has been proposed. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but that's often called the Common Information Service. I think they've named that stupidly, if I'm completely honest, because I think the term common has been applied as could be so many of them that there's not one anymore per country. There's actually N. And there's infinite common information services. And that doesn't work for the same reason, because again, what you want the Common Information Service to do is to protect all the things that are important for the state to keep, sovereignty of its airspace, control of its military assets, etc., and then to decide what information it then promulgates back out to the drone community of commercial users ultimately. And that model can't work if there are multiple SIS providers, for instance, unless the state is prepared to say, fine, I'll license them all. Because you know what's going to happen in Europe, right? The moment Huawei come along and say, we'd like to build a SIS, please, it's not going to happen, right? So I think for all sorts of reasons, there's just so many different challenges associated with one company being given carte blanche. But then you do see little tests popping up, don't you? You know, you get, I think, you know, Manor are doing some awesome work out in Ireland in a TDA. You've got, you know, Wing doing some stuff in a TDA. And that's all great if you're doing it out in the sticks. But if you want to do it next to Heathrow Airport, or you want to do it in a big town or a city, then you've got to open the sky again. Then you're back to square one. And that's where standards like remote ID don't help, right? Because they stop short of figuring out those elements.
Again, that's red card time, isn't it? He does need a red card. It's frightening, isn't it? That red and stuff. Red's frightening in many angles. I've said that a million times, but particularly that the community is only just realizing it's happening. That particularly frightens me, even though we've known about it for ages. Now, I did want to ask you, Richard, that Coventry rugby trial. That's obviously not within the corridor yet because the hardware's not up there. But they chose a very, very unusual route, straight out over a big highway intersection, and then flying, to my mind, the wrong side down a highway because you keep line features on your left. Then you should, in theory, you don't hit someone coming the other way. And then back over the highway and into the hospital, or really quite almost like a Z, and a long way round. Did you have any hand in that planning, or how is that being done at the moment?
Well, I've got to say completely that whilst we really love Skyfarer and we support them, they caught everyone by the hop a little bit by somehow linking what they're doing to Skyway. I want to be really clear. What they're doing is not part of Skyway, right? We've not deployed the infrastructure yet. They are part of the Skyway consortium, but I think probably someone in press just got a little bit confused and linked something together. I've spoken to Elliot and Skyfarer about it. They were a little bit upset that they did it, but they didn't mean to do it, and that's fine. So I don't really have any kind of good, juicy gossip for you on how they ended up with the route that they ended up. But what I will say is the route that they're in, obviously this is the difference between what's currently happening and what Skyway is going to be, is Skyfarer have got a TDA, right? And the Skyway route is not going to be in a TDA. So, you know, that's the polar difference there. So if you see a TDA, it's probably not Skyway.
Your dynamic routing, though, when you get to doing that sort of thing, or your basic routing, surely it's always going to be as straight line as possible, apart from some known objectors on the ground.
Is it?
Well,
so
I don't know.
weirdly, you'd
fishing.
think. I remember when we were envisaging Skyway almost a couple of years ago, we just kind of said we want to start here and we want to go there and we want to go over there and we want to cover off Cambridge, we want to cover Oxford, and you just draw points and then you connect more with a straight line. That's not how you're going to be able to do that flight safely, right? So then we've got to figure out, okay, well, within our sensing radius, where would we like to put our towers? So you start turning those lines into concentric circles to work out where you'd be happy. And then you go, where I've got the center of that circle, that's not going to work because actually that's a police station or something, you know, where you can't put the hardware. So you end up dragging and morphing the route. And then what you've got to think about is, you know, kind of as we're describing to, well, pretty much anyone will listen at the moment, you know, Skyway could be, you know, like a 10-kilometer wide highway, right, at its widest points. That's a huge amount. If you think about the average kind of size of a small drone, you could have thousands of these things horizontally all traveling in a line. We're not going to be doing that, right? You know, initially, Skyway is going to be using quite big buffers. It's going to be avoiding as much ground-based infrastructure as we possibly can. So when you submit a flight plan, the Skyway controller, as we call it, is going to edit that flight plan and send it back to you and say, that's what we can fulfill. Is that what you'd like to do? And that will mean that we're then changing that based on potentially even things like GPS interference or bad cellular coverage on that day, or even a tower that's out of commission. It could be any number of constraints that the routing algorithms will satisfy that probably mean 9 times out of 10, you're not flying A to B as the crow flies, so to speak. You're tracking something that is a route that we think is safer on that day.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. If you sit and yes, as you've plainly done it, you sit and start looking at it and thinking, well, I wouldn't go over that, I wouldn't go around that, I'd go through that, round that, over that. It is very interesting how things end up. But I thought that
I think
Big Z was very
one thing
interesting.
I would say, which I think we need to do a little bit more engagement with authorities on, is helping them understand that we're obviously putting these corridors in, and we're making a lot of assumptions right now about what we think we would like the corridor to look like. But we don't want to be the only people making those decisions, right? We want the authorities to have say in what the shape of those are. So what we are doing is we're building tool sets which allow regulators effectively to change the shape of the corridor, either on a schedule or on demand, effectively, so that immediately affects what's actually happening in the real world. And what that basically means is, imagine you've got that 10-kilometer wide point, between, I don't know, town A and town B. They might constrain that to, say, a kilometer wide, or they might split the corridor so that outbound drones are on 1 kilometer track 2 kilometers away from the center, and then returning drones are on another kilometer track on 2 kilometers away on the other side. So, we're making a lot of assumptions initially to get going, but it's not down to us exclusively, in our view, to be the people that make those final decisions. We're already giving local councils the tools to start thinking about where they would maybe want a vertiport or how they would want to do this. I mean, councils have never had to worry about it.
They just ban them all. That's what councils do. Is this a blame shifting thing?
It's one of the reasons we're working hard with them, right? Because actually, when we speak to a lot of the council, I can't speak for them all because we haven't spoken to them all, but we've spoken to a good sample of that just ban them, and a good sample that are finding a way to allow them. But the one thing that's common between the two is money, firstly, because councils have none. And so if you ask them about enabling drones and they've got no experience doing it, they immediately panic that it's going to cost them money and they can't possibly spare any people. Because rightly, their constituents are kind of complaining that the garbage isn't being collected, all that kind of stuff. So again, you can't go out there with $1 million tools that allow councils to do stuff that they're not doing now and aren't being complained for not doing about, and then don't have to go out and spend more money on. So, like we give drone operators tools today to fly safely, and we do that for free, and we will continue to do that. I want to be really clear. We've done that for almost a decade, and we'll continue to do that completely free. We're finding ways to give councils tools and other private landowners tools to allow them to say yes to more drones on their airspace, right? Or sorry, on their private land, and that's really important. Pardon?
Can they say no to them?
Yeah, so today a lot of the time they say no, right? There's some really famous landowners in the UK that say no, like the National Trust, and we're working hard with them to get them to say yes more. But actually, a lot of people think that it's just because they're mean and they're worried about safety. They're also worried about revenue. The Trust is a charity, and they sell the film rights for people to take photographs of the very expensive, old-fashioned mansions that they have. So they're worried that they're going to lose that income stream. And I get that. I understand that, because they have to fund that some way. But there is a difference, isn't there, between Joe Public rocking up and taking some photos of the kids versus a professional film unit turning up to have the property star in the next blockbuster, because there are commercial restrictions they could put on that, just as there are de-restrictions, if you like, that they could put on recreational users. So there's that on one side, and as I'm sure other people will say, if you go to these places, some people are really sensitive. They don't want to have in their view, they don't want to have drones buzzing around them, right, when they enjoy this 18th century mansion. So they're balancing a lot of different concerns. But I do think all private landowners are going to have a bit of a decision to make at some point, and it's, do I continue saying no, or for no apparent reason do I continue saying no, or shall I say yes and try and encourage this somehow safely?
If they don't want to lose the 18th century ambience, just use a trebuchet.
I mean, we can overfly anyway, so the rules allow us to overfly. So
correct,
they can think all they want. I can go and get in a Cessna and I can go and overfly that stately home anyway and use a camera if I wanted to, but no difference. for the most part.
And that's,
Well,
that's right. I think a lot of the time there are polarized opinions that fall one side or the other. And you're right. There are loads of nuances in the middle that are really challenging. But, again, bringing this back to drones rather than the guy in a Cessna, the drone pilot typically is going to be bound to visual line of sight, right? And if the trust owns hundreds of acres around one thing you want to film, you effectively can't do that, right? You've got to somehow take off and land on their.
All I'm going to say is Mini 2 owners on from what I see on Facebook and YouTube don't understand the VLOS, and it's nothing against them. They do a certain way.
Didn't Nat say you could do VLOS right down to the southern pole or something? Didn't they say that was all right?
It's how far you can see it's what it says on the side of the box. If it says 10 miles on the box, then it's 10 miles, isn't it? Otherwise, they wouldn't put it on the box, would they?
But this is a whole education thing, isn't it? It's not the drone operators that need educating now. It's the regulators and the local bodies that need the education now. And that's what I'm going to try and do with a series of videos, is to actually let them know that we know more than them in a whole lot of areas, and our valuable experience, knowledge, and understanding is something they should be tapping into to make sensible policy, sensible regulation, sensible bylaws and things to control this stuff.
Bingo. About this is herein lies the rub, right? I think I've been on this podcast in the past where we've had just this discussion where we just say quite often these decisions are being made by people who aren't bad people, right? They just have bad or worse, no information. Right? They have no data. So what they're doing is they're bringing their own prejudices one way or another, or they're bringing the lobbyists' prejudice to that conversation and then trying to make it work. That's wrong, in my view. And, Skyway is collecting evidence, and we call it evidence collection because it is there to help inform that debate, right? And it's not going to work if it isn't evidentially collected. So the problem is
we need a change of mindset from these people, because we've already presented them with overwhelming evidence as to the safety of these craft. They just ignore the facts. They ignore the evidence. They work on the hysteria. We're still at the stage where all automobiles must be preceded by a man with a red flag, and we need to change that outlook.
Well, again, I think I don't disagree with you at all. I just think it's a numbers game at the moment, right? These things are still exceptional, right? The vast majority of the public haven't been somewhere publicing, walking in a park and then just seen a drone, right? It's still a rare thing. So rare things promote a lot of query and a lot of concern, right? Because it's not normal. But no one now worries about the car going down the road, right? We did, the guy with a red flag died out many decades ago.
Not unless Mark's driving. But
so this is what I think my point is, right? As this becomes more mainstream and it becomes a little bit more accepted, it's harder to have these kind of stupid opinions and these non-factual opinions because everyone can see what's actually happening.
But we're told we're not supposed to fly over people, so people are never going to see us flying because we're not allowed to. And we've got this situation. How many flights with DJI say 84 million flights or something? It's not a minor thing anymore. There are lots of drones out there. And as the judge in the US said, drones are coming, lots of them. So what point do we need to progress to until we get to the point where suddenly they do become a mainstream thing? And if we don't get there soon, will we ever reach that point? Because the ignorance is killing things.
I mean, I overfly all the time, Bruce, to be honest. My permission allows me to. I overfly people all the time, roads, houses, you name it.
It's fun watching them scurry, eh?
Well, no one runs for cover. There's no panic.
Do you overfly or do you terrorize? Which one is it? I'll tell us all.
Oh, that's
when Mark's flying, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Whenever I'm flying, it's always the same thing, Richard. No, but I fly at 80 meters high.
Maybe how you fly.
My aircraft is mapping, or I'm out doing something because my permission allows me to, and yet every time I go out, I do leave behind a big car pile up, dead bodies everywhere, and it's a complete disaster scene after the flight. It's always just a complete mess. Always.
Probably just add for the regulators that watch that you're clearly joking here, right? That is
well,
but that's not true, everyone.
But the public opinion has changed. When I go flying a drone, people come up and ask me questions, and they're interested. They're not afraid. They're interested. They want to know more. They find it intriguing. It's not like they're all thinking, "Oh, you're spying on them." So the public opinion has changed. It's just the regulators and the rule makers and the policy makers who their opinion is lagging behind public opinion.
I think on that, by the way, I will say that we are working very closely with some extremely large logistics companies right now who are setting aside multiple billions of R&D to start incorporating drones into their actual normal inter-airport operations. So whilst I think it will be extremely unlikely that your average citizen walking around the street encounters one in the same way that the average citizen isn't really aware of that 747 at 35,000 feet over their head, these things will just creep in to normal day-to-day airport-to-airport runs and then gradually start to be a little bit more mainstream over time. We're not talking tomorrow, but over the next 3 years, inter-airport stuff is going to pick up a lot. And then probably 5 to 6 years after that, it's going to start being a little bit more visible in our daily lives. But it's never going to be that opening scene to Futurama, right? That's how I always describe it to people. If anyone remembers that, it's the opening credits in this cartoon world. There are thousands of vehicles flying around. Nonsense. Never going to happen. We're all too scared of that risk. And aviation risk is all about trying to avoid that kind of thing anyway. So I just don't see that happening. I just spotted, by the way, Mitchell Roberts has said something in the chat. And he said, I doubt there's a defined standard for areas to avoid either, things like schools, hospitals, seminars, etc. Firstly, on that, 100% agree with you. But what I will say is if you go onto dronesafetymap.com and zoom down to ground level, we will highlight for you all of those types of things that we have, and our drone operator community have previously told us it would be nice to have pointed out, right? So you will see schools, parks, playgrounds. Depending on where you are in the world, we will highlight things called funiculars, which are those wonderful, great big cable-based transport mechanisms. You will see roads, you'll see power station infrastructure, substations. If you're in the UK, I realize a lot of American folks, or sometimes a lot of folks from Asia, Southeast Asia, etc., they're not aware of this. But in the UK and in certain parts of Europe, we do stupid things. Like we hide all of our power station substations behind like fences with trees around them, so you don't know that they're there, right? So when you're walking past, you're like, oh, that's a nice park, but actually it's just a substation and it's all exposed to the air. So if you go onto our maps, I think there's over 70 categories of ground hazards that we'll see. But the second part of his question was I think even more pertinent, because he talks about dynamic risk, right? It's that thing that isn't on a map today because it wasn't there yesterday, right? And cranes are a real problem, but so are things like you get advertising blimps. I don't know if that will translate well around the world, but advertising balloons, tethered balloons. There are all sorts of things that could be a problem to Skyway, but that's why one of the things that Skyway does is it looks out along the route and is able to see effectively hazards that weren't there, even 5 seconds ago, 10 seconds ago. So I've no doubt in my mind that that's not going to be a perfect system. But the idea is to combine so many different sensors together, including sensors that are on board drones, and then feeding that data back into an evolving model. So that's the goal there. I just thought I'd try and get to that one because I've been burning to get to that.
Fair enough. And Tel Gatwick says, Anthony, I can tell you, Anthony, that the other Ian, the other not here Ian, has uncovered more people that were collared by the police for that incident. They didn't go quite as far, and they used Facebook images that these people had lived near Gatwick. Look, here's my drone, and one person in particular was a year before, and they'd got rid of the drone, but there's pictures on Facebook of them saying, look, I've got a drone, and they went and knocked their door as well. So Gatwick is going to be the gift that keeps giving, I think, for many, 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 many years. And I think Sean's got a video coming up about it. I'm not sure when that comes out. But yeah, it's a gift that keeps giving. And
Tell our Ministry of Transport, they're still quoting it as justification for things like drone registration and things.
yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
So
just on that crane thing, sorry, by the way, I should just say, I did just check. I couldn't remember the exact number, and I wanted to check before I said it live on air. But certainly in the UK, I think it's now a legal requirement, or has been a legal requirement for some time. If you're going to erect a crane that is 100 meters AGL or more, you have to notify the CAA. And then actually we get crane NOTAMs through, right? So if it's over a certain size, we'll get a NOTAM about it.
I think it's part 77 here. You've got to apply for approval to do stuff like that.
Inside airport, within 5 kilometres of an airport, a crane wants to be erected, they have to tell the airport, they have to apply, and the airport will then charge them a fortune for the risk assessment.
Yeah, to be actually, I think it says here to be used within 6 kilometers of an aerodrome or airfield, and its height exceeds 10 meters above AGL, all that of surrounding structures or trees. So it's, or then again, the other condition there is to be operated at or above a height of 100-meter AGL, regardless of the location or height of surrounding structures. So, obviously CAA have been managing aviation risk for a while, but I should say as well, most of the initial Skyway route that we're proposing is above 100 meters AGL. So that only means cranes that are NOTAMed should be notified. But again, from an aviation risk perspective, from a company who wants to take liability for a portion of your flight, it's not enough simply to say, oh, the crane shouldn't have been there. There are all sorts, and we've seen this a lot, right? The aviation industry gives the drone industry quite a bad rap for not, for being the newcomers and from the technology on the block perspective. But quite often there are problems with NOTAMs, officially distributed NOTAMs that don't work or don't parse correctly, or someone forgot to file it on time. So you can't just rely on a crane notification being distributed. You've got to be able to sense it, in our view, and that's what we did.
Can I notify you about the Karens and things? Do you have a Karen flag or something?
The Skyway system doesn't collect any personally identifiable information, Bruce. So I'm afraid I can't help you with that.
Damn.
So do you envisage then something like the Cessna cargo plane? Because they do a cargo version, if I remember correctly, that's automated, don't they? That's the kind of thing you would envisage to begin with then, sort of moving around, because you said from airports. And it can carry, what, 3-4 tons or something, can it? I can't remember the exact.
Is that the Sky Courier? I think they call it. Cessna Sky Courier. And it's made, isn't it?
I think it's isn't it? Bruce might know more. I don't know if Bruce remembers it. But they do. The Cessna do one, don't they? Like a Sky Cargo version.
Is it one of those that is optionally piloted? Is that how they describe it?
It might be, but I'm now gonna have to double check myself. I'm now going to double check.
You are right, Mark.
Probably the answer to your question is probably yes, because it's those types of large commercial drones. When we're talking about drones, we're thinking of probably more those than something like a DJI, what's it called, Matrice or something. Although they will have a place and they will be able to use the corridor. When we talk about drones and deliveries, from our perspective, it's the logistics companies trying to fly those types of aircraft, the big ones, not the little ones door to door.
So
when did Gary sneak out?
He did a runner a couple of minutes ago. He
wasn't paying attention.
Which means that we can't end the show because he's the only one that can push the end button. So now this will stream forevermore until he finds a way.
Well, let's start next week's stream now. Let's get in early.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's another question for you then, Richard. So if I came to you, let's say I'm a logistics company, I come to you and I go, I need to be able to go from here to here. We know we're leaving from an airport, but I want to get to this point here. Are you helping them find places to land or set up their landing area, or is it a case of we all we're doing is providing the air service as such?
So our predominant focus is on the air service, but it would be a little bit weird, wouldn't it? If we set up like a brand new motorway, right? We put this new highway in and then forgot to put service stations on it, right? So we're working with vertiport providers now, and some of those are logistics companies that are thinking of turning their existing depots into a sort of another service that they can accommodate either their own traffic or other people's traffic at. And we're bringing in to Outer Angel as a top level service what we call inventory location and slot scheduling. So the idea being, if you could submit something like a package manifest to Guardian, and then we would work out based on that manifest where you can go. But if you've got an aircraft that's big, you need to make this many drops. We'll try and schedule that, and then along the way, the vertiport companies are going to need to advertise to you when you can get there, when it's going to be out of bounds, if the slot is occupied, how much it's going to cost. Just like if you land at an airport today, you're going to pay a landing fee and a parking fee, right? Like, not people know that. Not a lot of people know that, but that's what happens. You literally in some airports as a GA pilot, you get out and you virtually pay and display, right? Like, you don't get a ticket. So that kind of stuff is stuff we're working closely on, but it's not our core business, right? To do vertiports, there are other people that do that, and we're partnering with a few of them to put some in along the main, what we call the trunk, and then supporting people to build others. But the last part I would say is you don't have to take off or land from infrastructure we or our partners provide, right? There is a wonderful visual. If you go onto our YouTube, and you look at the Skyway video, there is a visual, maybe a minute into it. I'll try and find the link in a minute, where we kind of zoom out and you see the corridor, and you see a drone approach the corridor from outside of it, and then it sort of ripples through this invisible boundary. Right, that is the point at which Skyway is taking over the responsibility for getting you to that end destination. So you can, I guess, if you're all sci-fi fans, and I imagine there's a disproportionate number of sci-fi fans on this channel versus any others, it's a little bit like a wormhole, right? You pop into it, and Skyway will take you out of it at the nearest point that you want to get to, that we can possibly give you a navigation service, and then it's down to you to figure out how to do the terminal bit.
So any farmer that has their landing strips where they have their own airfields with planning permission, because there are absolutely thousands out there. There's not hundreds, there are loads. Does that mean that someone smart should be now signing them up to be able to handle these kind of things? Because people are saying, oh, build vertiports, build this and the other. A vertiport will take millions to build, because you've got to buy the land in the expensive city. You've got all the infrastructure you've got to build for that. Whereas the farmer's field could literally be 2 miles out of town. You could avoid most of the traffic. There's just a head. There's a head appeared.
Yeah,
so we've got
Gary's his new virtual background.
Yeah.
You're right.
That would be perfect almost.
Yeah, I mean, there are...
your place, Sean.
Gary is in the middle of the worst power cut ever.
Yeah, I'm copying.
Somehow his torch is working. I don't know how
He's gone to Sean's place. Look,
I'm outside. I'm outside now. I'm outside.
Unpacked. They're in the same
African
building.
Night. Look, there's a tree. Yeah, I'm
Is it
outside
safe outside?
because when the power goes down like this, and then the internet goes, just about all the cell phone towers go nearby as well. And so I am stood at the top of my garden where I know I can talk to a cell phone tower about 20 k's away. So that's where I am now. It's quite cold. I shouldn't be wearing a t-shirt.
so should we go now?
No. You don't have to go now.
Take a hot water bottle next time.
I'm glad you're still here.
Well,
I
guess just picking up on
water bottle.
Oh yeah, that's true. You can't. You need a gas heater. Mark, on your questions, we work with some vertiport companies that are doing just that. Right? I think the property people call it optioning, which is they're taking out property options on roof space to develop at some point in the future and preventing other people from doing that. I think the interesting thing, and I'll come back to the snapshot drones question in a second. Otherwise, I will lose my train of thought. I think the interesting thing is there are lots of companies that are looking at things like agricultural land and saying, okay, well, it is just two kilometers from, say, a train station. Let's put it there. But you have to remember, virtually every country in the world has really strict planning laws. And usually they are some of the most stringent in green or agricultural land. So you can't just say, I'm going to turn my farm into Heathrow Terminal 8, for instance, right?
No, but they have permission for planes to land and take off. And there's quite a few of them.
You mean like grass strips and things like that?
Yes, but quite a lot of them, and not many people know this. They even have a way of handling customs, but not many people know that. And we're not talking strips that are huge. We are not talking massive places. You'll be amazed, honestly, you'll be amazed at what is possible at some of these little sites. It is really.
I've heard lots of stories, but I mean, we see, quote unquote, all of these locations where it is legal to put an aircraft today. And some of them, you're right, some of them are really small. Some of them, if you look at a satellite photo, you barely know that they're there, right? Because, there's one guy who flies his one Cessna from that, or whatever it's going to be, once a month on a Tuesday. But they're registered, they're on a map. And maybe there will be permission to develop that. But then there is a whole different change of use involved for then accepting high amounts of footfall and building passenger buildings and power and all that kind of stuff. If it's just a guy with a hangar in a field, it's very different to what a lot of these vertiport companies are planning. I'm not saying they won't be in the field, but I think the other challenge, and I think this one is missed a lot, is we all get really excited about urban air mobility in towns and cities, or particularly cities. But I don't know if you've noticed, but if you ever look at a satellite photo of the tops of most skyscrapers, you can't land on them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where they put all the air conditioning
Yeah.
and all the other stuff they don't want in the building. And then you've got to take into account, people are like, well, let's just build a structure on the roof. You know, every architect dies at this moment. It's just like, you want to do what? You want to put
Power
how
lines.
many tons? Okay, let's assume you can do that. The building was never designed to get thousands of passengers to the roof, right? In fact, they work quite hard to stop people getting to the roof.
Yeah.
So
and,
I think
and you've then got aircraft intentionally flying towards buildings, which also
which is another
feels a little
concern
counter
for a lot of
to
people.
common
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
So I think, again, like there are some cool concepts, and I do think the vertiport idea has legs. I think it has merit, but because of the constraints, you know, again, you have to. I am an optimist at heart, right? I started a company, but the realism has to come into it when you just say you can't put a vertiport wherever you want, right? There is a process, and it will be slow.
So a vertiport to me means vertical because it's got ver in it. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking vertical, which to me isn't sensible because multi-rotors struggle to carry a heavy payload and get good efficiency. To them, it's their worst nightmare. Where a fixed wing actually is better off, but it would mean small. You do need a strip of land and everything else, you know.
Well,
and
I guess
give
it's
them
going to be
runway.
right tool for the job, right? Like we don't fly the drones for people, right? We don't run the cargo service or the passenger service. So we have no literal stake in this game. But I think for that reason, I think Philip in the chat actually said something quite funny, right? He said vertiport, lol, heliport. Yeah, I mean, a vertiport is a heliport, right? But it's probably a smaller one and not taking existing traditional helicopters, blah, blah, blah. But if it's got a runway, it's probably just called an airport, right? I'm a little bit old fashioned like that. I mean, let's call a shoe and a spade a spade. So I think the only difference is, I think when you say vertiport to someone in this industry, we think, oh, there's probably a whole set of digital services there tailored towards supporting automated aviation versus what you typically find at, say, Gatwick, right? Or worse, that farm strip. So I think, there's a lot of fun stuff to consider. And I genuinely think that there is so much money at the moment going into the promise of vertiports that I'm still staggered by it, because it's not a proven business case. It's not even proven that you can leave one in place for a significant amount of time. And then much less, it's a lot like the UAM guys that are building vast amounts of cash to go and build these passenger carrying drones. But at the moment, all they are is basically helicopters, right? Until some other thing exists, i.e. something like Skyway or another solution. They're just electric helicopters, right?
Yeah.
Which is in and of itself, that's an amazing thing. But, until the drone automated aviation thing came along, they weren't raising $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars on $1 billion valuations promising that. So I still think there's a bit of a bubble in the vertiport thing that will sort itself out. But, we need this kind of infrastructure. Stuff that goes up needs to start on the ground, and stuff that is in the air needs to come down, right? We all know that.
How damaging do you feel that, and you may not want to answer this for all sorts of reasons, but anyway, I'll ask it. How damaging do you think things like vertiports are in terms of the real future flight? Because I'm in a lot of seminars, I'm in a lot of meetings, I'm in a lot of discussions about future flights, quote unquote, and a decent percentage of it, I feel, is almost damaging future flight, because it's connecting something that even the public, when they look at it, think, well, that's never going to happen. With things like Project Skyway and other things which actually have some legs and actually have some science and some backup to have those things actually happen. How damaging do you think that having these sort of pie in the sky? So actually, and then you get the headlines, of course, and a bit like, for instance, sorry to elongate, a bit like, for instance, drone delivery is going to come, and Amazon comes into it, and Google and everything. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. We're going to be delivering your pop socks and your trainers and your pizza by next year. And then, of course, them coming straight back out of it and backing out of it was very damaging to a lot of drone delivery companies that were trying to raise capital for very serious, more plausible drone delivery systems. Do you think that might happen on the future flight side of things?
Do you mean, when you say future flight, you mean small f, right? Not like the government-sponsored future. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think anything that anyone does in this industry, which is literally pie in the sky, is damaging, right? And we've always tried to differentiate ourselves by trying to avoid that kind of rhetoric, or just genuinely bowing out of that conversation when it gets a little bit fanciful. I wouldn't say. I think the vertiport thing. I think it depends. Like a lot of stuff in the industry we're all in. I think it depends how you bring it up to quote unquote Joe Public, right? If you just say in 2 years' time in that field over there, there's going to be a vertiport and it's going to have space for 5 automated electric aircraft, you're probably going to get laughed away. You know, Dave down the pub's going to not going to buy that.
We're outside. Hang on. I'm going to take you to a vertiport now. Let me go down these steps from that. I'm still on the platform. We can visit Vertiport Africa live. Hang on. Continue talking.
Can't wait to see the infrastructure. If you can't find it in the first place, how are we going to land
Does
on
it does it have lighting?
Yeah, you want to invest in some lighting, mate, or some candles. Candles will be fine.
Landing candles.
So I guess coming back to Sean's question, yeah, I think it's more to do with how that's raised. Like I think when we speak to a lot of folks that aren't necessarily involved in this industry but are thinking about the future and what drones might be able to do, I think it's really important to point out that, you know what, if we do agree that at some point in the future there's going to be more of these things in the sky, then it probably stands to reason, right? We need some place to put them, and they're going to need to be in places where we as a society are comfortable that they're not disrupting us all. So they're probably going to be tinier little versions of airports. You know, people kind of generally agree, right? It's sensible to think that through. But I think it doesn't help though when you're, you know, and I've been there as a startup company. That's kind of what investors want to hear, right? Investors want to believe that you're going to be this $1 billion company that's going to take over the world. And the only way you're going to possibly do that is to make more outlandish claims than the next person, right? So if you've got this gold-plated vertiport on the ground, the next guy's building a platinum-encrusted one on a 38-story building, and so on and so on forth. But eventually,
Investor clickbait.
yeah, and there's a load of it, right? You know, I mean, we used to get asked a lot from our investors, how do you differentiate from other UTMs? And the flippant answer we used to give people was, how many of them do you think there are, right? And the problem is now you have to do a Google keyword search for UTM, and there are probably everyone's got one, right? If you're a fleet operator and you're building software to just track what battery charge you've got in your drone, that's a UTM now. You know, that for us is very different. And you can't do anything to stop the colloquial use of those terms. I'm sure there are other industries that get frustrated by that kind of stuff too. But again, I think the way you have to differentiate is you have to just try and bring some realism to it all, even in the face of people that just believe strongly that the future isn't going to happen. Now, I think someone in the chat just now says drone delivery will never work. Okay, I don't know if you're right or you're wrong, but what I can say is I haven't got sufficient information to agree or disagree with you either way, right? I believe that a proportion of deliveries will take place via drone, but if you came into the chat late, for instance, you would have heard me say, I don't think it's going to be in the part that goes from the depot to your house. It's going to be depot to depot. And, you know, who knows what will happen beyond that time frame. But I do think, yeah, Sean, sorry, I've elongated my answer.
No, it's a great answer. It's a great answer.
I think that's probably the sensible approach, right? It's to really understand what someone is trying to understand themselves, and then help them work out probably what we're talking about is not that far away. Maybe the pitch that you've heard, you know, maybe that's the bit that's the bit that's going to get changed, and that would be my personal experience.
Okay. One quick follow-up question, if you don't mind, Gary, very quickly.
Carry on, mate.
Is where do you find the objections to Project Skyways are focused on? Because obviously it's a trial. It obviously has huge support, hence the wonderful funding and all of us jumping up and down in support of it in comparison to other options, including not having one, as you rightly said. But what are the common objections that are thrown at you regarding Project Skyway that have any merit?
Well, actually, for Skyway itself, so the formal program known as Skyway, we received 0 formal objections, right? But what I will say is, I think probably your question is probably more aiming at what kind of common concerns do people have, right? And the very common concern that almost everyone has, and it's a legitimate concern to have, is privacy, right? Loads of people are concerned about their privacy. But then again, you think about most of the public, they've read those tabloid stories where that bloke with a drone was chasing my daughter, or she was sunbathing in the garden and I saw this drone. You know, it's all the stuff that they're fed. And actually, when you say, like, you know, Skyway drones they'll have cameras, but they're pointing at the horizon. Why? Because they're not interested in you. They're interested in not smashing into another object. Right? So they're there to help the drone see and avoid other aircraft. And when we talk, then people focus on the towers and say, oh my goodness, these towers are going to have cameras on them. It's like, yes, what you can't see is what the cameras see. And when the camera has any part of the landmass in its horizon, it's not recording it, right? So I think you can start to help people understand that actually the reasons these things are here are for those purposes. I'm sure there could be a nefarious use of those, but we work really hard to make sure that can't happen. But privacy is one thing. Then there's usually someone that's taken a cybersecurity class one day and they've gone, you're just going to get hacked and everything's going to fall out of the sky because they've seen this movie once where that happened. And actually you have to say, well, you know what, we're a proper company, right? And actually we've been doing this for nearly 7.5 years. We've spent millions literally trying to secure this stuff and we're still learning, but there are all sorts of advancements in security these days that most of the public aren't aware of, that weren't around when they were a kid, right? So you can then say, okay, well, we're trying to take care of the privacy, take it really seriously. We're trying to take care of security, take it really seriously. The final one we usually get is if I see a drone, I'm going to shoot it down, right? And we get that. I've even had that in the UK, right? Where we don't have a lot of guns, right, Sean? Right? We have people with shotguns, usually wealthy people or farmers have shotguns. And they're rare, right? I'd say guns are probably more rare for me to encounter than a drone. Or hopefully most of the public, and maybe if you're really agricultural. But then you have to start by telling people that the only entity in a country authorized to shoot something out of the sky isn't you, mate. It's the military. Right? And if you do that, there is a far higher likelihood that you're going to prison for a very long time than anyone overflying your land. So it's trying to explain to people that, look, this is not a drone that's buzzing 8 meters above your house. It's going to be a minimum 100 meters above you, and it ain't going to be stopping around. It's en route, and a lot of people think that their drone is this small thing that loiters across the sky for ages, right? And actually, when you show them, we've shown them photos of there's a Bulgarian company, I think, that's making something called a Black Swan drone.
Yes,
it's massive.
Yes.
It's huge.
Yes.
I can't remember what the wingspan is, but it's bigger than my arms by a long shot. And this thing flies. So it's super fast. So you say, well, that's the kind of thing that's going up there, right? It's commercial. It's not being controlled by some nefarious dude. There's been a whole process of certification. There's been training involved. There's money that's changed hands because, they've had to get training, insurance, they're registered up to the hills. I think people's perceptions do start to change, but before Skyway, lastly, the one thing we used to get was we used to bear in mind, a lot of people think that Altitude Angel is the voice of the drone pilot community, right? And we try and take that really seriously, because we've always tried to be advocates, right? Like back in the day when drone pilots were bad people, right? They were just all bad. They were all trying to fly illegally. They were doing nefarious things. They were visiting nuclear power stations. And actually, when you pop the lid off that, it was because it was literally impossible for a drone pilot to have an easily accessible way to work out where they can fly, right? So we fixed that problem. Today, fast forward to now, I think when you engage with people, the public have a different perception of drones overall, right? Just generally, they see them doing more than just flying around Iraq and Afghanistan, killing innocent people now. They're all hearing a little bit more. But I think that process of engagement, being that voice of the drone community, and then helping the GA community to understand that drone people don't want to close their airspace. And that was the big one we got when we were forced to apply for a TDA. And I use that term really, really seriously because we used to actually refer to it with the CAA as the TDA that we didn't want, that you forced us to have, right? So when every conversation, that's what I asked my team to say, and it got really annoying. But the reason was that was the flow chart, right? If you want to do some BVLOS testing, you need a TDA. So the GA community equated the drone community with the ones that want that TDA. And we said no. So we put right at the top of our TDA application, and it is a matter of public record. If we get this done, this is so we complete the testing, so we can complete the testing. So hopefully no one needs a TDA to do BVLOS anymore. Excellent. We spent a lot of time working with GA, and now they're some of our strongest advocates, right? Because they see a lot of their, quote unquote, their airspace going away. And we still think, just from a technical perspective, there is no legitimate reason that we cannot share the air, right? I mean, the CAA had a whole program called Share the Air, and yet everything we've seen over time has been partitioning. Right? Let's just segment it more. Mustn't make any
It's the
sense.
easy way out, isn't it? Well,
Excellent,
it's
thank
the
you.
easy way. It's the easy way to do it, isn't it? It's the easy way.
Sorry, I went off on a tandem. Let's say that.
It was a good one.
And I've
Tiny
realised I can point to any piece of this dark night sky around me and say, "Welcome to Vertiport Africa," even though I haven't stepped a foot since I said I was going there. But that whole thing, the whole thing of imagining Vertiport Africa and going for it, and some people actually being fooled into thinking it's a real thing, amazingly, is you have to. People don't seem to think about the things. They don't seem to think about charging. They don't seem to think about approach. There's so many elements that just get whacked straight onto a press release, and they haven't given it any thought at all. And that's what I can't stand. I'm sure a lot of it will come to pass, but just for the Vertiport piece, Hyundai. I know you're in with a Hyundai a little bit, Richard. Hyundai, they're one of the serious players, but they're not shouting hard about it. They're quietly getting on with it. And that's the sort of thing I like. But anyway, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there are some serious players, and then there's still serious talkers. And I think I put Hyundai very much in a very diligent group. Like they're investing and they're watching and they're seeing. But we're part of that consortium. But there's not a lot of activity in that consortium at the moment, I have to say. And I think
they're in with the Coventry hub thing in the road, aren't they? That's like
Supernal, I think, or something. Is that group?
Yeah.
But overall, I think all consortium have to do something at some point. Otherwise, it's just a talking shop. And who a consortium attracts into it, I think, over time is a good indicator for whether it's just a talking shop or it's going to result in anything real. And I'd say one of the things we're doing in the new year is looking very diligently about the groups that we're in and asking ourselves, do we still want to be here because it's now changed from something that we were hoping it would become? It's no longer valuable for us to try and be in every conversation. It's just valuable for us to be in the ones that have value, right? And us having value is being able to actually meaningfully do a part of our vision, like deliver something for this industry, deliver something for society. That is why we get out of bed. And the money. We're just all millionaires. That's why we do it.
Yeah, and that part, of course. Well, I am stood on a platform at the top of my garden in the dark at 20 to 1 in the morning, so I probably should but knock this one on the head. Richard, as ever, thank you so much. You're so candid and so honest and so level-headed. It's redunculous. But thanks very much. And let's fingers crossed it all works for you fine. Sean, thanks for joining us, and Mark as ever. And that Kiwi guy's gone. Wherever you are in the world, dear viewer, this is a new one. Being outside, trying to find a signal in the dark. It almost beats posting to SUS News from my phone hung up under a kite to get a signal and it as a hotspot. It almost beats that, but not quite. Look after yourselves wherever you are. See you again next week, 2100 GMT. Cheers for now. One button here and one.